Hello there, my name is Rocco, and I'm the mind behind a bunch of interesting projects. And what we are dealing with today is an introduction to a modality using the tarot that I call the Loom. Now, geez, this requires a bit of explanation because tarot is something that is so often associated with like hacky parlor tricks and psychic grifters and just kind of people who are not grounded in the world that take some of this perhaps too seriously and then also not seriously enough. And I'm talking about these. I'm talking about the tarot cards. Now, I did a 6-month deep dive. There's another overused word. I did a 6-month deep dive on the 22 cards of the Major Arcana. And just to orient you a little bit as to how the tarot is made up. So there's two parts to a tarot deck. There's the part that eventually evolved into what we call modern playing cards. That's like a ace, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to king in each of the 4 decks. And so there's, or for the 4 suites. So there is what we recognize as spades, clubs, hearts, and diamonds. These used to be swords, wands, cups, and pentacles. Now, what I want to do, and I'm doing this raw for the first time, is I want to introduce you to these, the 4 suites, because there's archetypal meanings behind each of these, and then I also want to introduce you to the archetypes, each and every single one of them. That there's 22 of them. Now, why do I want to do this? Hey, so there's a couple of ways of looking at this question. The one is that, let's say that most of our questions, most of our challenges in life boil down to this this exploration of the unknown, or the exploration of the unconscious. So we have this real feeling, this real concern, this real question that we sit with. How to understand things, what's our relationship with, what is our relationship to unfolding reality, and what is our relationship to the cosmos? Yeah? Now, all of those things are emergent. The cosmos is not a fixed thing. It's an emergent process. The me that I am is not a fixed thing. It is an emergent process. But then everything is also in the process of becoming. Yeah. And so there's this kind of symmetry. What I mean by symmetry is we know what a spring and a summer and an autumn and a winter is, and then we can see that there's some equivalence in a human life. You know, when you're born, that's your spring, and when your young adulthood is your summer, and then your late adulthood is your autumn, yeah, and then towards the end of the life is the winter. There's these symmetries that exist between us and the world that we live in. Invariably, there's these symmetries, right? And sometimes we make a bit too much of them, and then we consider ourselves superstitious. And then sometimes we don't make enough of them at all, and then we kind of consider ourselves numb, basically, to this whole conversation that's going on in life. Now, if you followed the work, or if you know who Carl Jung is, Carl Jung said something interesting. He says, the mystic swims in the same waters that the psychotic drowns in. And this is what he's talking about. The implication here is, and what Carl Jung tried to explain, was that when you encounter somebody who's having a psychotic episode, you can try and explain it and categorize it as a clinician with reductionist psychological terms of phenomenon and syndromes and all sorts of things. But really, if you explore and inspect the mythic narrative that that person is living through, and haven't we all actually had these kind of experiences, then Carl Jung's assertion was that this mythic narrative, this language of tropes, of archetypes, how that explains our relationships to circumstance and to power and to fortune and misfortune, is actually our truest, most fundamental experience. The complex clinical psychology that we try to pack on top of that, is actually a reductionist abstract. And so this is very hard for Western psychology, Western medicine, and our reductionist worldview to actually get its head around, because what we're saying is, when any of us are having any kind of difficult experience, psychological experience, we're trying to always analyze ourselves based on terminology and categorizations and phenomenon and triggers and responses, as if we were this kind of technical mystery to solve. That's certainly one way of looking at things, and it helps us fix things like car engines and computers. But when it comes to a human being, we are, at the heart of us, a character living a story arc. We are a character living a story arc. Our relationship to the world is informed by our experience as a child through our relationship to our family and to our village and to our educators and our well-wishers and to our obstacles and problems and the things that scared us. The initial education that we get on how to be a person in the world, how to get our needs met, is actually an archetypal one. It's mythic. It's based on story. So what we're saying then is, if magic could be something real, I'm not talking about silly things like pulling rabbits out of hats or throwing chicken bones in the moonlight. I'm talking about the understanding of the mechanics of the power, the energy, the reality, the mechanics of the world, how those work, what the physics of those are. And some of them are non-visible. They're non-material. And we're very quickly learning, I hope, that just because something is non-material doesn't mean it's immaterial. Just think about the most profound choices that you've ever made in your life, these big decision points, right? Think about who we decide to get married to, the house that we choose, to consign ourselves to, like paying a mortgage off for 20, 30 years. I know this is becoming more impossible in modern world today, but think about those quality of choices, like when we resign from a job and choose another career, these big life decisions. Yes, we make them logically, but the final cut, the final decision is made in the heart. It's made in the gut, right? It's made from this sense of who we are in our story arc, and we make it on that level, not with reason. That doesn't mean to say we make it without reason, but the final arbiter is that fuck yes that we get in our hearts. And that's what causes our sense of regret. Because when we make choices that don't come from that kind of love, that don't come from that kind of self-knowing, that's when things go wrong, then we start reevaluating things. Now it starts becoming really important to understand that side of us. So the way I frame it is to say, if magic, then the knowledge of these invisible forces that we want to understand, if the language of that is imagination, right, then the vocabulary of that language is archetypal, is archetypes, it's symbols, it's metaphors, it's myth, it's allegory. That's the framework, that's the literary framework, that's the context that we actually need to understand in order to speak that language with a fluency and with a competency. And so what I'm doing here is I'm introducing the loom, like the weaving loom, and we'll get into the symbolism of that in a little bit later and across other episodes here. So I'm going to run this like something of a podcast, and it's going to be episodic, and sometimes I'll be explaining the archetypes, and sometimes I'll be explaining other elements, and sometimes we'll look at symmetries and doing other sorts of deep dives. It'll just be a rich, full-on exploration. But basically what we're covering here is how to understand that language again. Yeah. How to familiarize ourselves with these 22 cards, what they mean, what these archetypes mean. Now, to allow us into that conversation, yeah, what I did is I did a 6-month analysis of every single one of the 22 cards, those individual prime cards for which there's no duplicate in the pack. And what I mean by that is if you look at the rest of the deck, there's a 2 of swords, there's a 2 of clubs, a 2 of wands, there's a 2 of pentacles, there's a 2 of swords, cups, pentacles, and wands. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then the page, the knight, the queen, and the king. So there's one of those in each of the suits. But then there's this separate pack. It's called the Major Arcana, the Major Secret. And there's these individual archetypes that you don't see reproduced anywhere else. Yeah, there's just one of a kind of each of them. And if we're going to explore that language, what I did was I wanted to understand what the hell is up. Why is this such an enduring modality, right? Surely it can't be, I don't know where I put it now, but there's a little white booklet that comes with the pack, and it says, oh, this is how to draw the cards, and if you get the Knight of Cups, it means this. And I just thought, fuck, this cannot be the whole answer, right? Especially considering all the rich encoding that I've been, because for years as a young man, my whole life, actually, I've always picked up these cards and poured through them and tried to understand how there's so much intricate detail in there. Why would someone go to such detail? And also, I can't really show you now. I don't have, oh, maybe I can. I'll pull it up while I'm talking. There's little details inside the card. Let me see if I can pull one up quickly. Yeah, here we go. I'll just pull this up quickly for reference. Now, it's not a great image, but let me share it quickly. It's just this window. No. Cancel. I'll just pull it up. This is not the best image, but if you look in really closely, it's pretty crappy. Maybe I'll just show you on the camera. But here, I'm trying to refer to these ruffles or wrinkles on this character's robe. Now, let me break out of this because I'm not showing it to you very clearly. Let me find that card quickly, and I'll explain to you why I'm saying that there's meaningful detail that leaves you. Let me see if we can zoom into that. Can you see on top of this person's robe, over here, there's what looks like the rest of the ruffles in their robes. But if you look very closely, you will see it's actually the tetragrammaton, the 4-letter name of God in Hebrew letters. Now, that sort of little detail is smuggled in throughout the whole pack. And I always wondered, what else is there? And what does it all mean? You know, is it all just arbitrary? Is it just pretty? So I did a thorough dive. I looked at every single card, in random order. Yeah, what I did is I got our little daughter Maya. She was a pre-verbal toddler at that stage. She could just understand what was going on, and I would say to her every morning, I would turn the pack upside down and say, "Okay, Maya, pick a card." Yeah, and then she would pick the card for the day, and it became quite a thing for her because she was picking the card that Daddy was working on. And it was also her introduction over time to these cards and these archetypes. So they've been very normalized in her life. And so I would then take that card and I would analyze it initially over a day, but eventually it took me a couple of days, sometimes up to a week, to analyze this. And then I had to then re-go all the way to the beginning of the deck again, because as I went through the deck, I suddenly learned the depth of what was possible. And I figured out my cadence and my formula and my formatting. And now they're a series of 22 very detailed posts on my Substack called Hermetica Reiterated.substack.com. hermetica.reiterated.com, and I will leave a link in the notes here, hermetica.reiterated.substack.com. And for each of those cards, you'll notice if I lift a card up, there's a number on top, like this one. This one's in Roman numerals. It's number 17. It's called the star. Now, it might be inverted on your screen, but you'll get the picture. There's an image to the card. There's a title at the bottom. There's a number. And that already gave me some points to consider. So I knew there was a numerological question to be asked. There was the geometry and the sacred geometry that might be related to that number. So there was the name, the etymology, and then there was the symbolism and the symmetry and the posture of the card and the archetype that invoked. So what I did is I analyzed every single card by the numbers, the sacred geometry, any other semiotics and symbols that came up, the archetypes, the etymology. I broke down the word right down to its Proto-Indo-European root. I looked at the visual depiction of the card just so I could look at it clinically. And I did that in a very specific order, for a very specific reason. I first started with the nonverbal, the geometry, the number. And I just looked up what Pythagoras had to say. I looked up the sacred geometry. I looked through my other schools of context that I am well versed in, such as Hermetics and Kabbalah. And I picked up what these symbolisms may or could have alluded to or meant. And I held onto all of it. And when they started to correlate, then I tracked it and wrote it down. And so that when I got onto the later sections of each card, I had this non-verbal kind of priming ready by which to appreciate each card. So then I've already said I looked at the numbers, the geometry, the etymology, the semiotics and symbols, and then I left space for what I call an egregore, which is a hermetic magical concept of a thought form that kind of emerges from something. And so I left space for this egregore, and I sometimes looked at the card, what was emerging for me out of this analysis, and then I had to maybe revise it as I went through the card. So then what I also did is I looked at the unfolding of the card. If you actually look at the scene playing out in the card, there is something happening. There's a sense of dynamism or activity or an action or a process, and you can actually explore that. Then I looked at the symmetries that card had with other cards in the deck. So either through name, through position in the deck, through the numbers, through the visual motifs that were represented or echoed throughout the cards. And then I looked at the alchemical symbols. Some of it I found online, and some of it I had to discover. The Kabbalistic references, because it's another point of study of mine, is the gematria, the meaning of each of the 22 letters, their numerological values, the Kabbalistic tree of life. And the Kabbalistic tree of life actually has assignments of Hebrew letters in there, which then can correlate back to numbers. So we're getting a bit technical, but cut a long story short, it's all of those things I mentioned before, plus the Kabbalah, plus the alchemy, plus the hermetic principles that were echoed in the card, and then any astrological symbols, symbolism, references, as well as any other mythological archetypal characters, right? And then I pumped this whole thing into ChatGPT, and I said to it, given all of this context, tell me what the emergent synopsis is of all of this. And then I would take that, I would digest that on my own, and then I would write what's called an inner reflection, basically like a kind of meditation, wherein we're bringing this non-verbal reasoning mind that can appreciate sacred geometry and such things in concert, in conversation with this imaginative, mythic, archetypal, symbolic mind, and then weaving that together in a synthesis that one can reflect on. So now, when you encounter these cards and you're sitting with a question, what happens is it's a profound form of deepening an inner conversation, a rich and complex, non-trivial inner conversation. And so how I'm actually using it is I'm doing consulting work with people. So I'm doing readings. In other words, I've got a question about this. How do I answer it? Now, I don't know, how I would justify necessarily this as, like, let's call it fortune telling. But I know very, very clearly about what it means to justify the notion that we are in relationship with intelligence and consciousness of the universe in some way. As I said before, not everything that is non-material is immaterial. And for thousands of years, human beings lived with a dominant worldview called animism. And that basically said, the premise of animism is that we are in relationship with forces, consciousness, and forms of intelligence that make the clockwork of nature and the cosmos work at all. And we're in relationship with that, whether we like it or not. And symmetries exist between those things, as we've discussed before. There's correspondences that exist between those things. We see the same fractal golden spiral echoed throughout all of nature. We see the Fibonacci series repeating itself. There's these golden primes. There's a mathematics and a laws of rhythm and vibration and polarity that just pervade everything that we encounter in ourselves and in the world. And then, of course, through that universality, there has to be a correspondence. Everything is, of course, relative. So something magical happens, and I use that term non-literally. Something magical happens when you bring these two conversations together. The ancient Greeks, they used to say that there's two languages in which to hold the conversation of life: the language of logos and the language of mythos. Logos is the language of reason and logic and precision and the design, of our physics and our thermodynamics. And mythos is the language of myth, of imagination, of narrative, of story. Yeah. And they had this idea, the ancient Greeks, they lived with this idea called being double-minded, which means this is the root of wisdom, being able to hold the conversation of life in both languages at the same time. So what I then did is I devised a modality, which I am actually going to show you this. Let me raise my screen here real quick. Now, this didn't work, but let's go across to this. This is a modality I created called the Loom. So you basically do a 5-card draw. You sit with your question. You do a 5-card draw. The first one goes here. The second one goes there at the south node. The third one goes in this position, the voice of Logos. And the fourth one goes in the voice of Mythos. And the fifth one goes in this crux position, which we would say is the Emergent card. And then, if I can just break that for a second. So that 5-pointed, that 5 positions, that cross, which holds a space for 5 cards, that's where these major arcana, these archetypal cards, are drawn at random and placed in there. And then the last card is the modifier. And what I did is I took, what have I got here? What have I got? And how have I got too many of the same thing? That is curious. So it's these cards representing each of the suits. So I've got the Ace of Wands, I've got the Ace of Swords, I've got the Ace of Pentacles, and I've got the Ace of Cups. Yeah. Now, among other things, they represent fire, water, air, and earth. But there's more, but we won't get into it. And what I do, if I share my screen again, is I put that in the modifier card. And that's a small letter sigma, and that's a big letter sigma. So this almost puts like a twist or an accent on the reading. And then to understand what's happening here, and I'll explain this in better detail later. But just briefly, the point of all of this is if you come with your inquiry, This could be about your marriage. It could be about your career. It could be about some internal, personal question or struggle that you're wrestling with. Those 5 cards get placed there in random, and the framing says this. It says, if you can hold this frame, then this card in the middle will emerge. So I'll say that again. It says, if you can sustain this tensegrity, this balance between tension and integrity in yourself, in your actions, in your thought forms, in your decision making, in the place that you're coming from, the way that you're stepping through this challenge or this question in your life. If you can hold this frame, then this card in the middle, the Emergent card, is what will emerge. Yeah. So the North Node is this concept of what we're aiming towards in our life, our telos, our purpose, our the sense of meaning that we're reaching for, the becoming. Yeah. And the South Node is what is withdrawing, what is receding out of relevance, what we're anchored by in our life, what we've integrated already, that's locked in, or that we're busy locking in, or we can treat as locked in, so that we can now reach for this new thing in the North Node. Yeah. So you've got to see those as like a tension, a string that's being pulled, 2 ends of a compass, 2 poles of a magnet. Yeah. And it's saying this is the North Node. This is the archetype that you have to hold in mind as you're leaning forward or reaching forward towards something. And this is the South Node, the one that's going to anchor this expedition, or this reaching, or this foray towards your own becoming. The voice of Logos on the left-hand side here is the Greek lambda, and it's this letter shaped like this. And what that letter represents, what that position in the reading represents, is, imagine the intelligence and the consciousness of the universe. Imagine that was like a ChatGPT, all right? And imagine you could write a query and say, in regards to my question, what is the fact of the way the world works, or the way the universe is, or the way things are, the design of life and creation, the fundamental principles by which everything is ordered. What does that voice have to say in context to my question? Yeah. And on the other side, holding the tension this way, along the x-axis, is the voice of Mythos. And this card is nudging us to consider, to look at the card that comes up and ask ourselves, what is the narrative context by which we can hold this frame? What is the narrative context by which we can hold this frame? What story, archetype, or trope, or consideration of narrative can I consider or hold in mind in order to hold this frame? Yeah, as I step through my problem, as I hold the tension of this query, or this change, or this transition in my life. And so if I've got the card in the position of the North Node, and I've got a card in the position of the South Node, and I've got a card in the position of the voice of Logos, and one in the voice of Mythos, then I draw this, then I turn that final card over, and then suddenly these cards in context, they're actually having a form of unique conversation. That's not to say that those combinations don't come up, but as you draw those cards now you can refer back to the very deep analysis that I've written. And I've also got a summary analysis to like help prompt you to figure out what's going on. So this now becomes a modality whereby you can just deepen the inner conversation that you were trying to have with yourself and with the universe and the world anyway. And this is what the application of oracle or divination means. You know, divination doesn't mean reading the chicken bones to tell you something extraordinary about the world. To decide whether it's going to rain on your laundry or on your bike ride today, you can look outside and see the clouds banking. That is a form of prognostication. That's called divining. I'm divining the answer. I'm looking at all the inputs and the possibilities, and I'm qualifying what might be likely based on what I see. This modality called the Loom just helps you deepen that conversation, right? And if it's a deeply held question, don't you just know that these triggers and these conversation prompts are just they're going to catch you in some way, and they're going to make you curious and interested, and they nudge the doubts and the things that you already know in your subconscious about your shadow. Yeah, they expose these things in a what seems like quite a miraculous way. And if we want to understand how that trick or that miracle actually works, because it's quite fascinating to see it in action, we then we then get drawn deeper into the meaning of these archetypes and into the question of how such simple cards such as this, this like little pip deck of archetypes, how this pip deck can encode so much archetypal, symbolic, alchemical, etymological, geometrical symbolism and context. It's like a hologram. You can look at the card, and the more you understand about all of the things in the card that I've encoded, I mean, it's not as if these posts that I've written are finite. As I work with the cards and as I work with clients, the insight grows deeper, and I keep evolving that insight as well. I'm going to come out with a book at some point in time. But this is very, very good for diagnosing our own bullshit. It's very, very good for stepping through complex questions. It's very, very good for developing that inner conversation so that we can map and navigate our inner life, so that we can map and navigate our outer life from a place of more knowing and more certainty and more of a sense of being oriented and centered and belonging in this journey of ours that we're on. Yeah, because I'm going to wrap this up soon because the premise of something like evolutionary astrology, for example, or of Dharma, is that we're all on a journey of alchemical change, of evolving as a soul, yeah, through these experiences of a life. And we're doing that anyway. Don't we want to do that with a bit more skill and insight? And don't we want to feel not like stowaways of our own journeys, or like exiles from a context of understanding which we feel is just missing from us? And it's a real tragedy and a shame, actually, that our idea of people who work with such modalities are all grifters or kooks, or it's all silliness. Now, there is a lot of silliness muddying the water. There is so much ridiculous behavior and ideas completely derailing this noble project. But this is what this piece of work exists for. This is what my discerning and very well-intended work, yeah, on Substack and here on this podcast medium is actually existing for, so that we can reclaim that, right? Because the only way we're going to make sense of this troublesome and overwhelming, seemingly chaotic moment that's unfolding in the world is if we find contexts by which to understand what is happening. And it's my assertion that when things get overwhelming, when things seem chaotic, yeah, that is a direct symptom of the left brain, this reductionist worldview that we hold, that we are initiated into helplessly, yeah, as human beings in a modern context. That doesn't have answers, and it tries to analyze everything. And what's actually killing us is the endless glut of analysis and more analysis and more analysis and more cuts and more takes and more content and more and more and more and more. And we are drowning in that deluge of noise, yeah? And the reductionist left brain view of the world, the very literal view of the world, what it does is it puts together a lot of facts and truths that conspire to tell something of a troubling lie that we now have to try and live. Whereas the language of mythos and archetype, yeah, it deals in non-literal truths, not exactly lies at all, but they're things that are not factually true. And yet, when you sit and you work with them, they conspire to illuminate a very powerful and enduring truth about ourselves and the cosmos, the universe, and our place in it, and our relationships to our journey, and our relationship or the context of our journey to that wider cosmic context. And that is such an essential necessity in a human life at an individual level and at a collective level. So if any of this interests you, if you've wanted to explore archetypes more, if you've wanted to understand and learn a medium like the tarot, which is a very powerful facilitation tool for consultants as well. If you want to know more, come and find me, subscribe to the Hermetica Reiterated Substack. I'm going to be shipping this kind of work out through all of the other projects that I'm involved in and doing. But if you want to do a reading, if you want to learn how to practice this modality, both for yourself, but also as a practice helping other people deepen their own conversation of the same nature, then come and find me. There are links on the Hermetica Reiterated Substack. Yeah, so hermeticareiterated.substack.com. Come and find me. This post will definitely have a link, a booking link so you can book a session with me. And that's about it for now. And I'll sign off, and I'll see you again here in a certain amount of time, and we'll go deeper into tarot, into the Loom, and we'll actually start going through each of the cards individually and give you a taste of what's to come. So until next time, take care.